Okay, folks, that was pretty powerful testimony, I think.
Very strong testimony. The witness was emphatic regarding a number of things, particularly the impropriety of what he was witnessing. I noted illegal, unethical, not only unethical, but illegal, unethical, and immoral.
I mean, you think they saved this guy for last? Because he's angry.
Yeah, and you can understand why, given some of the allegations being lodged against him personally. It opens him up to some cross-examination on what his motive is and how much his personal interest might be shaping some of his testimony, but he certainly believes what it is he's saying about the impropriety he was witnessing.
Yeah, but?
He's swinging for the fences. He is trying to clean up any weakness that previous witnesses who are in the whistleblower case might have left. He is, not only said illegal, immoral, unethical, but he said he saw brazen conduct. So absolutely brazen, a really good word you don't hear very often. And then, it was stunning again when he said, what happened next? He said Brent showed up with a woman with a gun. I guess a man with a gun would have been, the same difference. But Brent showed up with some armed officer from the DA, and that from the AG, and that shocked him. And then you get around later, and he talks about the foreclosures, and he just gets in this little dig that the Attorney General himself had an open air fundraiser a month before. He said that it was too dangerous to have foreclosures on the courthouse steps.
A goose gander kind of situation.
Yeah, he had his own gathering. So that was just a little dig. Everything that he said has been pointed. It's been sharp. It's gone directly at Ken Paxton, and it'll be very interesting to see what the cross is like.
Yeah, and he, more so than the others, he comes across as just like, I'm not going to settle I'm not going to do this. I'm like when he's called into Brent Webster's office and told, well, you can resign and get severance or you can be fired. He pretty much is like, fire me.
Right.
I mean, this is a guy who, it feels very much like acted on principle.
Absolutely.
And I know, the whole thing about the settlement, I know that to be true, about that he was the holdout. He had conditions, and that's what they were talking about. He was not going to settle, and he wanted to make sure that should other public officials do as Ken Paxton did, that they were protected.
Well, he wanted that whole bizarre statement wiped out off the website. The AG had posted this long diatribe, right? It was so uncharacteristic of a government website that it was
right.
Just this long vociferous attack. He wanted that gone and wanted an apology for it.
Well, and this is a guy who had not worked in the AG's office very long. He was kind of brand new to that office. Mm-hmm. And he talks about, officing just down from Ken Paxton. You just have to wonder, his honeymoon did not last long.
At all.
That's pretty much an understatement. And
he acted a little surprised. He said, and there was another scheduler. I was no longer the scheduler. Well, after he raised these objections, but he was a little surprised that he was treated so harshly, but he got the boot.
He did get the boot, but just like the others, they established his conservative bona fides before they, launched into the testimony.
Right.
Every single one of these guys.
Right.
Okay, and there was question about that because is Rusty using up too much time with all this soft, show us your Scalia book and tell us what a good conservative you are, and is Rusty spending too much time, not softening up, but just kind of doing the cushy intro on these witnesses?
I don't know. All I know is we are 3 minutes away from when they can put Laura Olson on the stand. We've been watching the clock all day long. So what we're expecting, well, to answer your question is, I think was definitely a lot of time wasted early in this trial.
Yeah,
right.
I think there could have been a better, more expeditious use of time, because Aaron Epley got a whole lot further, a whole lot faster, and maybe you're right. Maybe these senators needed a softer touch, but you want to make sure that you have enough time to get through the key pieces of evidence, and it looks like we're going to get there, but it's going to be like landing this plane, kind of nose down, and and then you run it where we could see a situation where the defense puts up witnesses and there's no time to cross defense witnesses. Mm-hmm. That could happen.
That could happen. There's a very real scenario.
I think that is likely to happen.
There was a time when Texas is the West for sure, but in state court in particular. But when Rusty Hardin was coming up, it was the wild, wild West in terms of no clock management and judges giving you clear latitude to make your points for ungodly amounts of time, particularly in Harris County. But the new age of judges are really keen on putting lawyers on the clock. And you got to think whether Rusty is trying to hold back or hold on to how the practice used to be versus the way it is now, which is more of the speed and pace that we saw from Aaron.
Right.
When you get to the Supreme Court, you have 12 minutes or something
That's
like
right.
that?
Well, appellate advocacy and appellate litigation has always been a clock-based litigation in the oral advocacy context, but in the Texas state courtroom, particularly in Harris County in days past or years past, judges basically let you get after it.
I thought it was interesting. I saw on the camera the reaction of some of the senators, and I saw Senator Paul Bettencourt, who was firmly in Paxton's vote, during the motions early on. And he crossed his arms and rocked back in his chair. He was clearly uncomfortable with this testimony. And I wonder, we didn't get to see Drew Springer from Munster, but I would have loved to have seen Senator Springer when the name of his former opponent, Shelley Luther, came up. Shelley Luther, the hair salon owner in Dallas, who battled against the order to close her hair salon and went on and rode that to national fame and eventual place on in eventual political career running for the state Senate. That Senator Springer defeated her, although it was a very expensive campaign.
Yeah, well, I didn't know that because I guess I don't follow politics enough. But sorry, bud, I'm going to do better at following all the elections. But yeah,
hairdressers in politics is a very.
I do remember
topic.
The Shelley Luther case. I just didn't remember that she had run against Drew Springer. So what do you think they're doing on this break, Victor?
Well, this is typical of.
They were talking about planning, so.
In a protracted proceeding, when you're going all day, you typically have a mid-afternoon break. So I think everybody's probably just relaxing and stretching, particularly because we obviously are going to go past 5 p.m. today. So
I think they're doing the same thing we're doing. They're getting a cup of coffee
Well-
and kind of settling in.
Right.
And getting ready for the hurricane to hit.
Yeah, well, I'm waiting for, right now, they're going to take me live on TV here in, 10, probably 10 minutes. And so I've got my earpiece in listening for them to talk to me about that. But we're, of course, continuing to chat. So it's just kind of extreme multitasking going on here. It's kind of weird to have one thing going on in your ear and then you're talking about something else. My just testing my ability to pay attention to two things at once.
Well, it's showing your talent.
Exactly. What does Busby need to do on cross with this guy?
Wow. So I think if I were Busby and knowing Busby's style, he's probably going to light into him to really show how motivated this man is to personally shape or skew his testimony to be particularly, he's going to try to show bias.
Well, he's going to try to rattle him.
He's going to try to rattle him, but he's going to go after him. He's going to go after him pretty aggressively to show the jury that this is a guy who you have to view his testimony through the lens of somebody who has an axe to grind. While at the same time saying, these are his personal opinions, but they don't go to the issue of delinquency or maladministration.
Well, and I mean, Blake Brickman probably would say he's got a reason to have an axe to grind.
Yeah, certainly.
You know, and all of these guys had an axe to grind, but they would say we have an axe to grind because we were wronged.
Right.
Right.
Right. Right.
You know.
And the rejoinder by Busby will be, that's your opinion.
Right.
You don't know.
No.
Yes, he'll say you don't know. You didn't know. You know, you don't have any knowledge, isn't that right? You don't know. That's Busby's constant. He will, but he'll go back to and he'll produce some documents of how much Brickman loved Paxton and how much they're trying to, reflect to make all of the whistleblowers and everybody involved look like these turncoats that undermined the boss, and so they're trying to show that Brickman was involved in this office mutiny, and so he'll go back and show how loyal he was and that he turned on him, and he'll make him look like that he led a mutiny.
Do you think he'll succeed?
Well, it depends to some extent on how aggressive he is and how aggressive Brickman is in response. I think Brickman, as edgy as he was on testimony, needs to be calm and cross and not try to go mano a mano with Busby.
Right, right. Because the more personal interest he shows, the less the more it diminishes his credibility.
Well, and yeah, I kind of feel like with this guy, you run the risk that he might reveal some more things that you don't necessarily want out. I mean, this guy strikes me as this is not Mateer.
Right.
This is not Vassar. This guy is, he seems a little bit more like a political operative, than some of the prior ones we've had.
See, and that's the issue that I'm talking about regarding credibility. If what Busby is going to want to do is to have a very aggressive cross to show the jury that he's not a Drew Wick, for instance. This is a political operator, and you should view his testimony as such.
Well, the first thing he's going to do is say, tell us exactly what brazen, immoral, unethical conduct you have personal knowledge of. What do you know about it? What was brazen? What was immoral? What was it? Where did you see that? Did you see that? Do you know about that? How did you know about that?
But that might be a
Were you
dangerous
witness
question to
that?
ask.
Well, I mean, he would repeat something that he's already said. He's already listed it all. But Busby's going to say, do you have any personal knowledge of this? Or did you just hear it? Did you just hear it third hand?
Right.
Well, he was also, what did he say, 5 feet away? Mm-hmm. His office was 5 feet away from Ken Paxton. Yeah. So he had a bird's eye view during this really critical period of what was going on.
Right.
Well, plus you get into adding immoral in that set of immoral, unethical conduct, illegal, immoral, unethical conduct. Well, we're not here about immoral conduct. And so you make him sound like a moralizing employee who's got so upset over an affair that he started compiling a list of all these other things that were wrong.
And
so you remind everybody, morality is not in question.
And that's Busby's argument. That's going to be his argument, or whoever does the closing argument. This is not about morality or immorality.
Hold on a second. I'm going to talk to the producer. Yes, I can hear you. I can hear them in my ear. I got you. Okay. All right. So just, I'm talking to the producer, guys. Just let me know when give me kind of like cues on how far out we are. Okay, great. Thank you. So, sorry. How long do you think they keep him on the stand? Because I mean, we're going to want to get to Laura Olson here pretty soon.
Absolutely. I would think that there should not be too much redirect, if any, of this witness. They've served their purpose, which is to fill some time with the witness who had some punch to them, to get them to the time that they can call the big witness for the day.
And how long do you think Laura's testimony goes? I mean, how long do they keep her on the stand? We don't really have any idea, I guess.
Well, the one thing that you pointed out that they have to be mindful of is if the defense decides to put on some witnesses, they want to save some time so that they have the opportunity to cross-examine witnesses.
And I'm going to add that if you are really trying to put on a show for the public, then you don't want Laura on the stand during a news block.
Okay,
That's true.
Sorry, guys. I'm on our live feed. I'm listening to the show right now. They're 15 seconds for me. Okay. It absolutely is, because the issue here is this woman's name is Laura Olson, and she ultimately was employed by Nate Paul. Nate Paul is this friend and campaign donor who is at the center of these allegations that Ken Paxton took favors and house renovations, and that Ken Paxton did things on behalf of Nate Paul. And then also with Laura Olson, what I believe they're going to ask her is how she came to be employed by Nate Paul. Who suggested that? How did that happen? They're going to also want to, I think, ask her about. There's been allegations that Ken Paxton disregarded his security detail and in terms of how this affair got started. So there's going to be a lot of things that I think are going to come out, and they're going to have a lot of questions for her, and it's really going to revolve around this issue of how they're going to allege that he abused his office in order to have this affair with her. That's right. It tense, doesn't it? I don't even think begins to cover it. And part of what happened today was, first thing this morning, the House impeachment managers, they called Laura Olson. They said, we called Laura Olson to the stand, and then all of a sudden we saw lawyers gathered around the dais, and then it was announced that no, we can't bring her to the stand yet because they had put her name on the witness list late in the day, so they had to wait until 3. The earliest that they could call her was 3:53, and of course we're past 3:53, and so right now they're on a break. They've got another witness on the stand, but based on what we've seen, as soon as that witness is done, I believe Laura Olson will be taking the stand. Whew, okay, guys. All right.
Double duty there.
That is double duty. Let me tell you.
Move back over
trying to.
My shoulder was in the picture, so I moved.
Your
over
shoulder.
a little bit.
Well, we're just kind of making it all work, guys. Yeah. So, I mean, I think her testimony is going to be explosive. I really do. I think I think she's going to be the last witness for the prosecution. Why would you put anybody else up after that?
I agree.
I think she is the one. Do you think they always plan to make her the last? Would we have seen these other witnesses but for what happened today?
That's a good question. It's a good question.
I mean, I think they would have called Wicker.
I think so.
I think Wicker would have gotten called.
Well, they wanted to start the day with her, so that indicates the tone that they wanted to set. So they've had to turn the day inside out. Yeah,
I mean, exactly. So they went with Wicker, and then of course now, and Wicker was a great witness. Mm-hmm. I mean, Wicker was, they started the day strong yesterday with Brandon Kamek, and then of course by late in the day it became kind of a slog. But we really haven't had a lot of slog today. Today's been all pretty good.
Yeah, right. Drew Wicker from Prosper, was an excellent witness, and his conservative credentials were as good as anyone's, but also he sounded very calm, didn't sound like he had an axe to grind. Mm-hmm. He was a really calm, tempered witness, and he seemed like somebody who was really fair-minded.
No, he did. He seemed like he genuinely still liked Ken Paxton.
Right.
Like that he was almost, it's almost like you're disappointed in your father. That's how it felt to me.
Yet it was clear that he was very measured and circumspect in his testimony, and if you juxtapose his demeanor with the present witness's demeanor, you can see what I mean by how believability can be diminished by the amount of vitriol that you have that comes out in your testimony, because people start to think, how much is your personal dislike coming into and factoring into the testimony that you're giving. I thought Drew Wicker was a credible witness because it was clear that he's close to the Paxtons, but he was honestly answering questions and trying to be careful on both direct and cross-examination.
Which is why the whole thing, I think, about when this invoice is issued and when it is paid was pretty effective.
Right.
You know,
Right.
in my opinion. I mean, that. But it's also the danger with Brickman, right?
That's true.
Because Brickman is angry.
Right.
And you can feel his anger.
You can feel it.
I mean, kind of righteous indignation, more so than we've seen with any. I don't know that I felt anger so much from any of the others. Did you? I mean,
No, the others were somewhat.
They were more paper pushery.
Except
for Maxwell.
They were portrayed as bureaucrats, and I think that was pretty well the way they came off. I think. Brickman, on the other hand, seemed like he wanted to jump up out of the chair
And throttle somebody.
Yeah.
Right.
He
Right.
seemed like he wanted to take some action. But even Wicker's great testimony. I mean, he was shocked when he saw Paxton coming out of the hotel elevator with another woman. And here we get back again to this question of, were you all so upset at morality that you started raising, that you started getting upset about everything else? Was it really the moralizing that led you to file all these other charges and put together all these other complaints? And are you taking issue just because someone had an affair?
Yeah. So a little bit of background on Blake Brickman. He was the former chief of staff to the governor of Kentucky, Republican governor of Kentucky, chief of staff to a United States senator. He law clerk to a federal judge, and he's also an advisor to an institute called the Cicero Institute. I've never heard of that, but it looks like it's probably a conservative-leaning group. I mean, just based on kind of where he is. So I mean, and actually a number of these whistleblowers are connected to conservative,
Right.
think tanky kinds of things.
Consultants, lawyers, particularly the whistleblower. Let's see.
I think it
was
wasn't
Vanguard, who's with Alliance Defending Freedom.
And
attacking
Mateer is
gay
with
rights and
Liberty Legal, I think.
Liberty Legal here in Plano.
With Brickman, Victor, if you were going to cross-examine Brickman, what would you do?
I would really get after him, and
Would you yell?
I might.
I mean, you don't strike me as a yeller, but
I might pound the table, and I might really try to yank his chain a little bit so I can bring that anger out even more. Because again, my view is if you listen to a witness who is particularly angry, you have to at some point start thinking how much is the anger misshaping or fusing into what should be truthful testimony, such that the testimony really is being shaped by the anger as opposed to a accurate memory.
And so would you, with a guy like that, so you want to get him spun up.
You want to get him spun up. You want to get him even more spun up than he is right now.
You want to get, I can't resist, you want to get the "a few good men" moment. You want me
Absolutely,
on that wall, you need me on that wall. Like,
absolutely.
sorry, for the younger folks, they may not know what that movie is, but that's one of my favorite movies of all time. You
can't
handle the truth.
That's right. That's right.
But I kind of feel like he's the kind of guy that you might want to spin up like that.
Right. I mean, there's a region of the brain called the limbic system, and then the amygdala. If you get people out of their cortex, they make mistakes and errors, and that's what you're going to want to do with this witness.
I am really outmatched with Victor here. Victor seems to know a whole lot about everything. And All I can do
Well,
is
y'all
make
know more
sports
than I
announcements.
do. So
No, you know a whole lot more about politics than most people, but the understanding how the mind works and how the brain works and how people's psychology works is important to what we do in the courtroom.
But I think that's one of the reasons why we took this approach with this live stream and having a legal expert and a political expert was because we realized, because initially I've done other trials like this. You know, I did, you know, the Amber Geiger trial. You know, she was accused of, or she was convicted of killing Botham Jean back in, I'm sorry, the years are all running together for me now, like 4 or 5 years ago. And then of course I did the Aaron Dean trial. And so, and those have been, those were traditional criminal trials, right? And so we didn't have a political expert, but with this we realized we've got to have the Bud Kennedys and the Bernadines and the Katie Sherrotts, people like that understand politics, because that's not, I don't cover politics, not in a direct way. Usually when I cover a politician, they've gotten arrested.
That's right.
I mean, that's just the reality. They've gotten in trouble, they've gotten indicted, something bad's happening, or something bad's going to happen to them.
Well, on television, yeah, this looks like a trial, but if you turn to the camera the other way, it looks like a political event. There are 31 senators sitting out there listening. I think 6 or 8 of them will be on the ballot in the primary in March. They're immediately facing an opponent, potential opponent, if they don't vote the way their districts want. They have to run for election. They'll get their check from the voters right away. They'll get their status check of whether they voted the right way or the wrong way. The rest of them are up in 2 and 3 years. But so, you know, it's very much about the election. It's very much about 2024. And for the senators, it's about getting reelected. It's about maintaining the favor of the lieutenant governor, who they need in order to pass their bills. And it's also about maintaining the favor of the governor, who needs to sign their bills. So,
And the governor has been very quiet.
the governor has been posting and tweeting about what a great conservative state Texas is, and then we'll hear from him about school vouchers later on. But he's just stayed out of all this, and intentionally so. But although some members of his campaign have clearly been arguing, at least echoing some of what the House prosecutors said.
Right, and it in a normal criminal trial, like, so we have this whole situation where tomorrow morning the jurors are going to vote on this motion this motion for reconsideration on whether or not to combine the votes for removal and the vote to ban. Have you ever, Victor, in your entire life, heard of jurors voting on anything? I mean, that shows you just how different this is.
Absolutely not. So is the most I've seen out of a jury doing anything than receiving evidence is, I mean, we do have courts that do this in Texas. It's more frequent and common outside of Texas. We'll have jurors pose questions, typically writing them out and handing them to the judge to have those questions answered. But yeah, this is totally like anathema. We would not see this in a courtroom, to have the jurors ruling on motions.
And to reset, if people missed that was just a moment this morning, but the prosecutors moved to have the jury vote, and it would be only a majority vote on whether to consolidate the scheduled 2 votes as one. They originally, in their rules of the trial, had planned to have 2 votes, one on whether to remove him from office, this is a removal trial, and the second on whether to bar him from running for future office. The prosecution moved to consolidate the 2 votes into one. They can't vote on that until tomorrow. They'll have a decision by a majority vote on whether to cast something that has to be decided by a 2/3 vote. So we could conceivably see the Senate voting by majority to combine the votes, but maybe not make the 2/3 for removal.
Well, and again, you could have some senators that just don't want to telegraph how they're going to vote. Right? I mean, because if you vote to combine, you're telegraphing what you're going to do.
Well, plus that also takes a little bit of the protection away from the senators. If you went to the voters and say, yes, I thought we should remove him, but I'm going to give the voters the decision, on whether to ever let him run for office again. That it gives the senators a little bit of an apology tool to go back to the voters. This would take that away. I do think that they'll probably vote for it in a majority just to get this done, so they don't have to stand up one by one twice and cast their votes on essentially the same question. And you know, this is something interesting to point up. I've seen the questions about it today. If they do remove him and ban him from future office, that only applies to state and local office. That only applies to the offices created in the state of Texas. He could run for congressman, any congressional seat in the country,
Right.
because you don't have to be a resident to run for
Well,
Congress.
and Ted Cruz is coming
He
back
could
up.
He could run for Senate.
Right,
He
or is
wouldn't
it-
run
no,
against
it's Cornyn.
Ted Cruz.
Cornyn.
So he could run for John Cornyn's seat. He could run for, but I mean, the main thing, he could run against any congressman that crossed him, or congresswoman. So it would not preclude him from running for office.
Yeah, and it's just going to be so fascinating. But we're going to know how each juror voted, which is also unusual. I mean, well, of course,
Absolutely.
they sometimes will poll the jury, but in a normal trial, the jurors just you wouldn't see them publicly. It's just
Standing
it's
up like at an elementary school, 31 each
Right.
standing up, holding up their hand,
right.
you know, and named at random and standing up and saying yay or nay.
It's kind of like again, it's sort of a quasi criminal trial that we've got going on here, but it doesn't have. But obviously, we're not trying to prove criminality necessarily. You don't have to prove criminality. You can prove, what was it?
Sustain the articles of impeachment is
Right.
what they're voting on, whether
Right.
to
But
sustain
it's,
the article.
what was it?
Delinquency.
What was that term again?
Delinquencies or maladministration were
Right.
the words from the Texas Supreme Court.
Yeah. So it's not. They don't have to prove that Ken Paxton committed a crime.
No, any criminal prosecution could be handled later by any agency that chose to see, any criminal investigation. Certainly there are some, investigations already underway, but this is not about investigating crime at all.
In your mind, Victor, do you think they end? Do they end with Laura? I mean, is she it?
I would. I think that's what's going to happen.
And do you rest if you're the defense after that?
It depends on what happens with the testimony of Olson and how that goes. I would think that a prudent defense attorney would say, you know what, I don't have the burden here, so let me, less is more. But who knows what's going to happen with the testimony and what they might have to do through one or two witnesses in light of what Olson says.
Yeah, that's hard to say. I could see if they've got 3 or 4 hours left, I could see them taking advantage of the fact that the House impeachment managers can't ask questions.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, that feels like a real like something they would do. How effective did you think them walking Brickman through all the things that he thought was untrue in that AG's report? How effective did y'all think that was?
I thought that was pretty effective.
The AG's report hasn't been talked about much, and that was really one of the abuses of the Attorney General's power, was to write this long, outrageous personal defense and post it on a state website. It's not even cited specifically in any of the articles of impeachment, but it's not the kind of thing you would normally see a government post with public resources. I mean, these were, publicly state attorneys and a public website and a public resource that appeared to be used for a personal purpose. That's blatantly illegal.
He also talked about how, because one of the contentions that Ken Paxton has made is that, the voters voted. They knew about all this stuff about me, and they still elected me again as their attorney general. And what Brickman was testifying about was that because they made this, because Paxton's legal team filed tried to get it tossed based on this idea that that the Whistleblower Act didn't apply to public officials, elected public officials. And he basically said, look, they tied up our case for 2 years. And he called it the absurd argument that the Whistleblower Act does not apply to him, meaning Ken Paxton, and that stopped discovery. So he said, look, the public couldn't have known about all of it because discovery got stopped. That felt like it landed to me.
That's right. Yeah.
I hope the senators knew that already, but they may not have.
You cannot assume they know all this stuff.
No.
That's right.
It feels like, because you'd like to think that that they were paying attention to all of it, right? But not necessarily.
You never know.
Yeah, if it wasn't on Fox News, they may not have known.
Exactly. Well, and it doesn't feel like this would be the kind of these allegations would have been the kind of thing that would just get a whole lot of attention.
I don't
from
think
Fox
Tucker
News.
Carlson spent a lot of time on this.
No, not Tucker. Anyway.
What do you think? We've been speculating about the schedule on this, and you were talking about the vote because we think there might be a vote maybe tomorrow. Do we still think that the defense comes back with witnesses tomorrow morning, and then do we get witnesses, closing statements, and a vote all in one day, or do we spill over into Friday?
I think we go into Friday. I just think we go into Friday because Busby and the defense team strikes me as people who will take advantage of if they've got a few hours on the clock.
Using every minute.
Using their clock.
Right. And so if we can stick a couple of witnesses up there basically unopposed, but does Patrick give some time for a little bit of cross? That feels really, unfair if he doesn't.
No, that's been said previously that it might seem unfair, but not necessarily when everybody up front knew what the playing rules were, including the rules regarding time. It's the ultimate in fairness to stick to what you said and not to give anybody any extra time because you said these are the rules.
Except for a lot of time got eat with objections.
Right, but somebody might say the football game is on the line and the other team has the ball with 10 seconds left and they scored with 1 second left. It might seem fair to give the other side some extra time, but everybody knows going into a football game what the time constraints are and how you have to manage the game. And time is time.
Patrick might say, I think he already did this once during the trial, he might give them both a little extra time, which means if the prosecution wants a little extra time, then that also means a little more Tony Busby time.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, I don't know. But I also think that if I could see the travel calendars for these senators, I'm almost betting money.
Busby's got this vast deep state conspiracy that he's got to lay out. He's got to have a little time to do that.
Yeah, well, and he he might want to go. Maybe he puts George P. Bush up. Because he's made a big deal out of the fact that George P. Bush renewed his law license. But you don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to be I didn't realize that.
He didn't have a license when he ran.
Right. I didn't actually know that you didn't have to be a licensed attorney in the state of Texas to be the AG.
No, we take walk-ins. It's just like Justice of the Peace. We take walk-ins for the job.
That feels kind of stunning to me. Did you know that, Victor? I did not know that until last week when Bud told me.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
Is what you get for assuming things. Hey guys, I'm going to watch the okay. Somebody asked, is prosecution allowed to object in court now? Well, yeah, they can object. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at the questions here. If you guys have any questions, we'll try to answer
as long as they
them.
have time. Oh, they can object, yeah.
And I assume the question I'm reading into the question, can the prosecution object? In the defense's case, if the prosecution is out of time and under the rules that we've established, I think the answer is yes, because that's going against the defense's clock.
Right.
Right. So yes, I think they will be able to object, but if they've run out of time, they wouldn't be able to they wouldn't be able to do cross.
But here's a strategic lawyer, a chess player, would make objections, but they would make the objections speaking objections. So they might not get cross per se, but through their speaking objections, they could kind of make their cross points throughout the direct examination.
Kind of sprinkle it in, yeah.
Right? So that
they
by
might
the
get
time the defense witness is done, defense witness A, for instance, there might not be any cross-examination, but given the speaking objections we've seen from both sides here, the senators will clearly know what the prosecution's angle is on the witness.
So John Maybe says, the other point I would have made about the report is why wasn't Kamek paid if his hiring was legitimate?
That's a good question.
I mean, I think the fact that Kamek doesn't get paid is really problematic.
I think the only person that you can ask why he wasn't paid is the Attorney General, who is not here to answer that question. And I noticed somebody posted a picture of a car in Austin driving around with a sign, "Where's Ken?" You know, I think we have started to wonder that.
Somebody asked, how much time does each side have remaining? I don't actually know that. We know that as of this morning, it was about 5 hours for the prosecution. It was about 9 hours for the defense. But there's been so many sidebars and so many breaks that I wouldn't even hesitate a guess to try to figure out. But I would guess that the House has a couple hours.
It always seems to be more time than we thought.
It does seem to be more time. I feel like that Dan Patrick is being liberal with the time clock, which is not a word you would normally associate with Dan Patrick. But I think that's what's happening, because it feels like maybe they're adding time back in or something here and there, because I thought there was a lot less time than there was at various points.
We're building up the suspense for the appearance of Laura Olson, but there's still another witness on the stand for cross-examination, right?
Mr. Brickman, yeah. Well, because we want to hear Laura Olson.
Right.
Richard Dunks asks, what's the potential legal and professional scrutiny for Michael Wynn in all of this? Michael Wynn was the attorney for Nate Paul. He's all up in the middle of this. He's the one that was providing this list of who should be subpoenaed to Brandon Kamek, and among those people that were to be subpoenaed were Ray Chester, who was an attorney for the Mitty Foundation, and others connected to Nate Paul's business stuff, as well as federal officials and this, that, and the other. Victor, I'm going to ask you that because you're the lawyer on the panel.
Well, it's a good question. As I assess it on its face and think about it, logically, Michael Wynn has a client to represent, and it might be argued that a zealous advocate, which our ethical rules require zealous advocacy on behalf of our clients, was doing exactly what he was supposed to do for his client. There's a difference between what Michael Wynn's responsibilities are, what Kamek's responsibilities are, and what the AG's responsibilities are. And if Michael Wynn is advocating for his client in a way that happens to help his client, it might be argued that what he did was entirely proper.
Somebody's asking if they're back in session right now. No, they are not back in session. Do you remember, Bud, do you know what time they went out? Was it about 3:50?
You know, I think, we said it was right about 3:50. It was right about the magic hour that they took a break. But now, Dan, when they took a break, Dan said they had something to work out. So.
Well, he said they needed to work on planning things.
Yeah.
So Jonathan Yu asks, are extramarital affairs impeachable offenses? Bud?
Well, under the definition, anything is an impeachable offense. There is no definition in Texas of an impeachable offense. In the federal government, you have high crimes and misdemeanors and all that, but in Texas, it's wide open. The Supreme Court ruling defined the purpose of impeachment as delinquencies or maladministration. I think that just simply having an extramarital affair probably wouldn't fall under one of those categories, but if it somehow affected the running of the office, or then it might.
Chris Grimes asks, do you think the defense will put on any witnesses, even though they don't have to? We've talked about that. We think they will, but they also might not.
They might. I think it probably depends in part on the effectiveness or not of Olson as a witness. The conventional wisdom amongst defense attorneys is you don't have a burden of proof, and if you think the prosecution, because of that, has not met theirs, then less is more, and perhaps you don't put on any witnesses. But there is the strategic advantage that we talked about with the mismatch of time between the defense and the House managers in this instance, you might see the defense make some points in direct examination in their case in chief without the House managers having the opportunity to cross-examine.
Certainly the peanut gallery on social media wants everybody in the FBI called in and everybody put on the stand and everybody questions. So we'll see whether that actually turns out to be the case.
Somebody's, Darth Dionysus is asking, can Paxton be charged criminally after this? Well, there is an ongoing FBI investigation.
He's on bond right now.
Well, he's on bond in the securities fraud
Right.
cases. He was indicted back in 2015 on 2 counts of first-degree felony securities fraud and 1 count of I forget the other charge. It's a third-degree felony. It has to do with filing paperwork with the securities board. And there's certain law, a law that, by the way, he voted for.
He voted for, and in the civil side of this, he acknowledged some of the, doing some of this to the state securities board already. So he's already acknowledged some of this that he faces criminal charges for. The other argument on this, on his side, is that this is a criminal charge that, as far as anyone can tell, has never been filed in the state of Texas. It's never been filed as a criminal case anywhere. They're making a special example of Ken Paxton. He is free on $35,000 bond and has been serving as Attorney General and reelected twice while free.
And Victor, how unusual is it for a case to take that long? I mean, he was indicted a long time ago.
It's not unusual, particularly in a case where the stakes are high or there's some profile for the proceedings to be protracted for one reason or another. And I'm not closely following those proceedings, but there have been venue challenges and lots of pretrial motions, and that tends to protract proceedings.
You had the long argument, Collin County didn't want to pay the special prosecutor
That
anymore,
issue.
and then that had to go, and then it's moved around to Tarrant County, and now is in Harris County, and I think a hearing's been scheduled. And the answer is yes, he can be charged, with anything. Any evidence that came forth in this trial can be used in any future criminal case.
Let's see, I'm still watching these comments. Folks are asking, do the closing arguments count against the clock? I'm not actually sure of that answer.
I
of
believe
that.
it was described as time for witnesses.
I think it's outside of. I think they have an hour for closing arguments.
Yeah, I think that was in the rules that were set. I can't
Yeah.
remember.
So
I don't recall.
Yeah, I'm going to claim a little bit of ignorance on that. I believe it's outside the 24, but I have to go back and look at the rules. Okay, so Joseph Calderara, I'm probably not saying that correctly. It says, if anyone is caught lying in these proceedings, can they be charged with perjury?
Yes.
And kind of walk us through that. I mean, I agree with you. I know that should be true, but explain to folks why that's the case.
Well, it's an official proceeding, and prevaricating in the context of an official proceeding has criminal consequences.
So let's see. Somebody says, how many times has Paxton been indicted? Well, he was indicted back in 2015. And then they actually did a re-indictment on the same charges. They reworded the indictment. I recall that. It's been a long time ago. But yeah, he was indicted back in 2015. And that's the only charges, those original charges that he got indicted on. There is that ongoing federal investigation. And we know from listening to this testimony, Missy Carey talked about being called to a federal grand jury.
Right.
But we know that although he's been reelected while out on bond, we know from the Texas Politics Project survey, and his defenders will say, well, the voters knew all about this and reelected him. But the survey shows that 40 to 50% of Texas voters did not know anything about any of his legal problems before either election. 50% before the first election, and then 40% before the most recent election. So a large portion of Texas, obviously there's very little state political coverage in much of the state. People weren't aware. He's a down ballot official. There are so many reasons that people are not keeping up with the Attorney General, but people weren't aware of the problems. In the general election, he was running against Democrats that had that had little money and were not able to run, any sort of statewide campaign challenging, Paxton. So people didn't really know.
Yeah, and the commenters here are saying that the closing arguments is separate from testimony time, and I believe that to be true. Actually, it's been a long week and a half, guys. I mean, 12-hour days every day, so it's starting to wear a little bit.
Right.
You're wanting to wrap up tomorrow.
I know, and yes, because it's been long. My kid is kind of reminding me 27 total on each side. That's right. It was 24 for testimony time. It was an hour for rebuttal. And it was an hour for openings, an hour for closing. Now it's all kind of coming back to me, and so.
So there is an hour for rebuttal.
Interesting. There is an hour for rebuttal. I remember that now. Actually, that was in my notes earlier. So somebody's asking, will this be done this week? I think it'll be done this week. I'd be shocked.
I think so too, but whether or not it's done this week depends on whether extra time is given or not. Something you just said caused me to think about strategy here. If there's additional time for the House managers to put on a rebuttal case, that militates in favor of the defense not putting on a case, because if you don't put on a case, there's nothing to rebut.
Right.
Well, if the defense feels like that they haven't proven any of the 16 articles, that none of them will be sustained, then the defense doesn't have to put on a case.
Right.
I noticed there were mailers going out from at least one conservative group saying to call your senators that the vote will be Saturday. I don't know how valid that information is, but we'd like to see it Friday night, but it may well be Saturday.
I just feel like these senators are going to want to go home.
Right.
But that's just, that's don't say that based on any information. I just say that based upon, really just upon having covered juries.
Right.
I mean, juries, they like to wrap it up before the weekend.
They really do. The last case I tried, I was telling you all, I was on a clock, federal court in New York City, and the case got to the jury on Friday morning, and they were out of there by 2 o'clock. They didn't want to stay.
No.
It was interesting is they took lunch, so they ate their lunch that was supplied by the court, and after the lunch that was supplied by the court, they all of a sudden had a verdict, so they were going to get their court supplied lunch before they took off for the weekend.
In my experience, they almost always eat lunch. They always eat lunch.
Particularly the lunches that are being supplied are good lunches, and there were pretty good lunches supplied during this trial. So why not take advantage of the fact that you're doing a public service and the parties are supplying you a good lunch on their dime? You got to take it.
The senators would probably like to get out and go to the football games.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and have a good weekend.
I know on Friday nights for me, that's high school football time, so I'm sure that there's some senators who probably feel the same way.
So Mike in Houston wants to know, what happened to the 44 minutes the prosecution saved on opening? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. I don't know if it went into their.
Well, he said it added to their time.
I guess they just added it into their.
Added into their witness time. They've taken a lot of witness time.
I think that's probably what happened. Let's see. And so we've got a live look up of the Senate chambers, and we still don't have Dan Patrick back. No jurors. There's been a lot of great testimony today, but also a lot of downtime too.
Right.
Which is kind of surprising. So I don't know. And somebody's asking, why is Ken Paxton not in the room? Do you, if you were one of Ken Paxton's attorneys, Victor, would you have Ken Paxton there?
Well, he's probably not there at the advice of counsel. I mentioned earlier that there are lawyers that make strategic decisions to not have their client in the courtroom. I tried a case here in the Civil District Court right up the street at 600 Commerce at the end of last year, and the plaintiff decided to not show up for the trial except when she testified. And I believe that was a lawyer-driven decision to ensure that the jury did not assess and judge the plaintiff throughout the trial. Maybe Ken Paxton's not a good poker player. Perhaps his facial expressions would betray him, and/or there are any number of strategic reasons why a lawyer would not have their client in the courtroom.
And I've said that I think it's because he doesn't want to be photographed exchanging glances with Senator Paxton,
Right.
and to have her. It's enough that she's there, and so if they're both there, then that's what the photos are going to show. So.
I cannot imagine being in her shoes.
Well, and she doesn't get to vote,
No.
which was the topic of a lawsuit of whether she should get to vote or not. When she was elected, we discussed on Inside Texas Politics the question of, what if her husband is impeached? She'll be in the Senate voting on her husband, on whether to remove her husband or not. And the Senate just, somewhat arbitrarily set this rule and said she can't vote. There was a lawsuit over that went to the Supreme Court and upheld the rules of the Senate saying she can't vote. But it did come up during her election.
Mm-hmm.
So Chris Grimes has a question for you, Bud. He wants to know any thoughts about senators knowing beforehand how they are going to vote, but proceeding with the trial in order to give their constituents justification for their final vote.
Well, I think a lot of the senators knew how they were going to vote going in. I think almost all of them did. I think that it was about one vote difference for or against removal going in. I think that the reason they've gone ahead with this trial is to first of all, to have the openness and show to the people of Texas that they were open and wanted to listen and hear the case and to hear all the charges. I do think that during the course of the trial, early in the trial, I think there might have been a slide toward the prosecution. It seemed like maybe the prosecution might have picked up a vote or two, and then during some of the cross-examination of the early witnesses, then they may have slip back to where they were. I think all the senators knew what they wanted. Some of them voted. We had the 6 that voted with Paxton on resolutions going in, and that didn't even want to have a trial at all. And I think that all of them know what they want, and they know who they're trying to please, and they know how to vote. I do see them paying attention. I think they're attentive, and I think that's because they have to go back to the public and explain why they voted the way they did. I don't think the trial has changed a lot of minds out of the 31.
So Tamara S. is asking, who are the 6 senators that, standing with Paxton, I think what she means is the 6 senators that initially voted to dismiss all of the articles. That was, you got that written down? I've got it somewhere in my notes.
See, I've probably got the opposite. I've got the 6.
It was Colhorst, Hall, Betancourt, Parker. I'm trying to think out the other 2. Shoot, I'd have to go back into all my notes. There was 6 of them, yeah.
And for different reasons, I think, on each part.
Why
But,
do you say that?
Well, I think some are voting because they are voting the way they think that Lieutenant Governor Patrick wants them to vote. I think that some of them are voting because they have future political aspirations statewide, and they think that this is where the primary is going, or this is where a statewide party is going. Bob Hall is voting because Bob Hall is the crusty old, right-wing member of the Senate, and he certainly would vote that way. Brandon Creighton, Lois Colhorst, I think
they're going through the list. Okay.
Yeah, I think they have statewide ambitions. Paul Betancourt in Houston is kind of Lieutenant Governor Patrick's right-hand senator, but although Lieutenant Governor Patrick's 2 allies voted on opposite sides of this, his 2 strongest allies, Hughes and Brian Hughes and Paul Betancourt. I think Betancourt, through his body language, sees all this as just kind of a waste, and he doesn't want to be seen as weak. He wants to be seen as on board with the Patriot Trump team that's backing Paxton. You have Tan Parker, whose district stretches from Highland Park up through Denton County. I can't really explain Tan Parker's position in this, but I think it's probably pressure from the voters and pressure from his district. And then you have Senator Donna Campbell, who's former Chief of Staff Laura Olson, is in the middle of this. So those are the 6 who have been the people with Paxton all the way. And I'll have to look up and see who's up for re-election next year.
So Chance Escamilla asked how many votes are needed to impeach. Needs 21. You're going to need the 12 Democrats, because it would appear that the 12 Democrats are going to hold together, plus 9 Republicans. And we're going to see what's going to happen. Because it's a heavy lift to ask Republican senators to vote to remove a sitting Republican Attorney General from office.
Right. Yeah, you need 5 of the 6 swing. There's 6 that are considered that probably will vote, and then there's 6 that are swing, and you need 5 of the 6 on only 1 article of impeachment. You have 16 articles, so you have 16 bites at the apple, but you need 5 of the 6 swing Republican senators, and that's why I've said all along that I just don't know if the prosecution can get there.
So Christopher Carson asks, let me see, maybe Victor will speak to this one. Can the panel speak to whether the shared ideological bent of the OAG enabled the alleged corrupt behavior? I mean, these guys had no problem working for the AG under indictment. In other words, I guess he's saying that, did the atmosphere in the office lead to this? I guess is what he's kind of saying.
Oh, that's something I really can't speak to. I'd have to ask Bud that.
Well, thank you for that hot potato.
I'm just tossing out hot potatoes in the comments now.
I think certainly the single mindset of the office and the conservative mindset and the belief that everything we're doing is righteous and pure, led originally to their belief in their boss and their belief in that everything their boss is doing must be righteous and pure. Mm-hmm. At the same time, it's what has led their whistleblower case to be such a strong reaction, is that they saw things that they felt like weren't righteous and pure and in keeping with what they saw as Christian and what they saw as something they should believe in. And this gets back to faith, but they saw someone who they believed, and we said this before. Ken Paxton, we should be seeing him, but we should be seeing him repenting. We should be seeing him asking forgiveness. We should be seeing him expressing sorrow, and we haven't. We haven't seen any of those things. So I think the staff saw that he was an unrepentant, offender, and they reacted very strongly to that. I think it was very much both their political beliefs and their faith and values that they felt like that he was. And this is where you get deeper into Christian belief, but they felt like that he was damaging to Christian witness. That
right.
Holding him up as an example of a Christian in politics was damaging to Christian witness and hurt other fellow Christians who wanted to promote the conservative cause.
Well, and there's a scripture that talks about, when you talk about Christian witness, the one about going, you go to your, someone's done wrong, and then if they won't admit it, then you take 2 or 3, and then I think it was part of
that was quoted in the trial.
That
was cited.
I'd have to. I think it's in Matthew.
It was cited to one of the witnesses of why didn't you do that?
So jumping subjects here. I'm going to go to Victor for this one. Explain why Nate Paul wasn't called. He's under indictment, so kind of walk people through why he's not, why they wouldn't call him.
Well, why the House managers wouldn't call him?
Yeah, let's just talk about that.
Well, I think it would be pretty obvious that if he were called, he'd take the fifth.
Right.
And do you want to waste time, since you're on the clock, with calling a witness that is going to take the fifth, and nobody's really going to try to infer one way or another why he's taking the fifth, because it's pretty much conventional wisdom that he should take the fifth.
Okay, they're trying to talk in my ear.
trying to find who's up for re-election. Well, see, I'm here with my 2 phones. They accuse him of having 4 phones.
Hold on, I got to put the correct ear thing in here. Sorry, I got multiple boxes, little boxes, one for the TV and one for the live stream. Okay, go ahead, Jay. Now I can hear you. Oh, really? Okay, yeah. So yeah, what Jay is telling me, there's some things going on behind the scenes that we're looking into, related to what, the Laura Olson situation. Of course, we're waiting to see, when she's going to take the stand. I'm being vague here, purposely vague. So yeah, we're kind of like, I've had on my other screen, I've had the Senate feed up, and well, here you can see it on the screen. You can see Rusty Hardin. You can see a number of the senators have entered back in the room. Okay, there's Dan Patrick coming in. He's coming up to the dais. So I guess they're going to start back up. Jay, do you just want to go ahead and kill our mics and let's listen to what's going on?